I arrived at my parents' upscale Christmas party with my 7-year-old daughter Emma. Despite their explicit no-children rule, I had been financially supporting my retired parents for 3 years since my father's heart attack. As I walked through the front door, I froze in shock. My ex-wife Sandra was there with her new boyfriend Marcus and their 3 young children, all laughing and playing freely in the living room. My mother approached with a warm smile, saying, "The other children deserve to be here because Marcus is such a wonderful provider." Standing in that doorway, watching my daughter's confused face as she saw other kids running around the house she was supposedly banned from, I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. 2 years had passed since Sandra left me for Marcus, a wealthy real estate developer who promised her everything I apparently couldn't provide. The divorce had been brutal, but Id worked hard to maintain a civil relationship for Emma's sake. She deserved to have both her parents in her life, even if we couldn't be together. What made this moment so devastating wasn't just seeing Sandra there. It was remembering last week's phone call with my mother Patricia, where she'd been crystal clear about the party rules. No children allowed. This was supposed to be a sophisticated gathering for my father, Harold's former business associates and close friends. Shed explained how children would ruin the elegant atmosphere they'd worked so hard to create. I'd been disappointed but understood, planning to drop Emma off at my sister's house before coming by myself later in the evening. But here I was, having decided at the last minute to bring Emma anyway, thinking maybe my parents would make an exception for their only grandchild on Christmas Eve. Instead, I discovered that children weren't banned at all. Just my child. For 3 years now, I'd been sending my parents $4,000 every month. When Harold had his massive heart attack and had to retire early from his accounting firm, their world fell apart financially. His pension wasn't enough to cover their mortgage on this beautiful suburban home, let alone his expensive medications and ongoing medical care. Patricia had never worked outside the home, dedicating herself to being the perfect wife and mother. When Harold couldn't work anymore, I stepped up without hesitation. $4,000 might not sound like much to some people, but on my salary as a mechanical engineer at a mid-sized manufacturing company, it meant I was living paycheck to paycheck. I'd moved Emma and myself into a modest 2-bedroom apartment instead of the house I'd been planning to buy. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic that needed constant repairs. I shopped at discount grocery stores and hadn't bought myself new clothes in over a year. Every sacrifice felt worth it to keep my parents in their home and ensure Harold got the medical care he needed. Patricia pulled me aside into the hallway, away from Emma, who was standing awkwardly by the door, still wearing her little red Christmas dress that we'd picked out together last week. My mother's face was flushed with what I initially thought was embarrassment, but I quickly realized was actually excitement. "George, I'm so glad you're here," she whispered, glancing back toward the living room where Marcus was entertaining a group of guests with some animated story. "I've been wanting to talk to you about some changes we've been considering." Changes. That word sent a chill down my spine. "Sandra and Marcus have been visiting us regularly," Patricia continued, her voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before when she talked about Sandra. "During our marriage, my mother had always been polite but distant with my wife. Now she sounded genuinely warm, almost affectionate. They've been so kind, George. Marcus has been helping with Harold's medical appointments, driving him to the specialist in the city. And he's been so generous with gifts and helping around the house." I stared at my mother, trying to process what she was telling me. "Mom, what are you saying?" "Well, Marcus thinks Emma would benefit from more structure in her life. He and Sandra have been talking about family dynamics, and they've made some really thoughtful observations about child development." Patricia's words felt like ice water being poured over my head. "We've been having family dinners together, just getting to know Marcus better. Has such a wonderful provider, George. So stable and established." The word provider hit me like a slap. Here I was, literally providing for my parents' survival, and they were praising another man for being a provider. "Marcus and Sandra have been planning family events?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia nodded enthusiastically. "Oh yes, we've had such lovely times together. Marcus took Harold fishing last month, and they've become quite close. Has been asking Harold's advice about investments and business matters. It's been wonderful for your father to feel valued and respected again." As she spoke, I realized this wasn't a recent development. This had been going on for months, and I'd been completely unaware. While I'd been working overtime to send them money, scraping together every penny to keep them afloat, they'd been building a relationship with my replacement. The man who'd destroyed my marriage was now being welcomed into my family like a long-lost son. "We think it might be better if you took a step back from some of the family responsibilities," Patricia said gently, as if she were offering me a gift. "Marcus has offered to help more, and he's in such a better position to provide the kind of stability we all need." I looked through the archway into the living room, where Emma stood alone by the Christmas tree, watching Marcus' 3 children play with expensive toys, while the adults ignored her completely. Sandra was laughing at something one of Harold's old colleagues had said, looking more relaxed and happy than I'd seen her in years. Marcus had his arm around her waist possessively, playing the perfect family man. This was the climactic twist I should have seen coming but never did. My own parents had been secretly meeting with Sandra and Marcus for months, not just tolerating them but actively planning to exclude me from family gatherings. They weren't just choosing Marcus over me financially. They were choosing him as a son. Emma finally walked over to where the other children were playing near the fireplace, her small hands clasped behind her back in that shy way she had when she felt uncertain. I watched as Marcus' kids barely acknowledged her presence. His oldest boy, maybe 9 years old, actually moved his toy cars away when Emma tried to sit down near them. Marcus noticed, but instead of correcting his son's behavior, he simply called the boy over and started showing him Harold's vintage pocket watch collection. My father, looking healthier and more animated than I'd seen him since his heart attack, was beaming as he explained the history of each timepiece. These were the same watches Harold had mentioned selling just 3 months ago when his medication costs had spiked. Head called me in tears, saying he might have to part with his father's legacy to pay for his heart medications. I'd immediately increased my monthly support and taken on weekend consulting work to cover the extra expenses. Now here was Harold, proudly displaying his complete collection to the man who'd stolen his son's wife. Sandra approached me with that particular expression she used to wear when she was about to deliver bad news, but wanted to seem caring about it. During our marriage, I'd learned to dread that look. It meant she'd already made a decision and was just going through the motions of discussing it with me. "George, I'm really glad you came tonight," she said, her voice soft and concerned. "Marcus and I have been talking a lot about Emma's development, and we think she might benefit from some changes in her routine." "What kind of changes?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to hear the answer. "Well, Marcus has a lot of experience with children, as you can see. His kids are so well-behaved and confident. He thinks Emma might be struggling with some confidence issues because of the instability in her living situation." Sandra glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then continued. "Your apartment is quite small, and Emma doesn't have a proper yard to play in or space for friends to visit. Marcus thinks she needs more structure and consistency." I felt my jaw clench. Emma and I had worked hard to create a happy home in our apartment. We had movie nights every Friday, cooked breakfast together on weekends, and she'd been thriving in her new school. Yes, our place was smaller than the house Sandra shared with Marcus, but it was filled with love and attention. Emma had her own room decorated with her artwork and photos of us together. We'd built pillow forts in the living room and had tea parties at our little kitchen table. "Emma seems perfectly happy to me," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Oh, George, I know you're doing your best," Sandra replied with that patronizing tone I remembered too well. "But children need stability and resources for proper development. Marcus has been researching childhood psychology, and he's concerned about some things he's observed." "What things?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "Well, her shyness for one thing. And she's been having some trouble in school, hasn't she? Her teacher mentioned that she seems withdrawn during group activities." Sandra's voice carried false concern. "Marcus thinks she might benefit from having a stronger male role model in her daily life." This was news to me. Emma's teacher had never mentioned any concerns about her being withdrawn. In fact, at the last parent-teacher conference just 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Johnson had praised Emma for her creativity and kindness toward other students. She was reading above grade level and excelled in math. Where was Sandra getting this information? Before I could respond, Harold appeared beside us and placed his hand on my shoulder. "George, son, come into my study for a minute." there's something I want to discuss with you. I followed my father down the hallway to his home office, the same room where Head taught me to do homework at his big oak desk when I was Emma's age. As we entered, I immediately noticed changes that made my stomach drop. The room had been completely redecorated. Where Harold's old computer and basic furniture used to be, there was now a state-of-the-art desktop setup, a new leather chair, and an entertainment center with a large flat-screen TV. "Dad, when did you get all this new stuff?" I asked, running my hand along the smooth leather of his chair. Harold looked almost embarrassed. "Marcus helped us upgrade a few things. He said a man my age deserved to be comfortable, especially after everything I've been through with my health. Marcus bought all this. The furniture and electronics in this room alone probably cost more than I made in 2 months." "Well, not exactly bought," Harold said, settling into his new chair with obvious pleasure. "More like an investment in the family's future. Marcus has some business opportunities he's been discussing with me. He values my experience and wants me to feel like a partner rather than just someone receiving charity." The word charity felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "Is that how my father saw my support? As charity?" Harold opened his desk drawer and pulled out a folder filled with architectural drawings and blueprints. "Look at this, George. Marcus is planning to add a family room and expanded kitchen to the house. Professional-grade appliances, a breakfast nook, even a playroom for the children." He spread the papers across his desk with obvious excitement. I leaned over to examine the plans, noting the professional quality and expensive specifications. "Dad, this must cost a fortune. How can you afford this?" "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Harold said, his tone becoming more serious. "Marcus has offered to handle the financing for the renovation. Has also been helping with my medical expenses and some of our other costs. The thing is, George, I know you've been struggling to support us, and I hate being a burden on you." "You're not a burden, Dad. You're my father. This is what family does for each other." Harold's expression grew uncomfortable. "But son, you're just starting your own life. You should be saving for Emma's future. Maybe buying a house, building your own wealth. It doesn't seem right for a young man like you to be supporting his parents when there are other options available." "Other options? Meaning Marcus. Marcus is in a much better financial position to help," Harold continued. "Has established, successful, and he genuinely cares about this family's well-being. Has been suggesting that maybe it's time for you to focus on your own life and let him take over some of the responsibilities you've been carrying." I stared at the blueprints, seeing room after room designed for Marcus' vision of family life. There was a playroom specifically labeled for children, but somehow I doubted Emma would be welcome to use it. The master bedroom addition was clearly designed for Sandra and Marcus. Even the kitchen renovation included a breakfast nook with seating for Marcus' family size, not ours. "These plans look like they're designed for Marcus to move in here," I said quietly. "Well, not immediately," Harold replied, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "But Marcus thinks it would make sense for him and Sandra to be closer, especially if they're going to be helping with our care as we get older. Has been very thoughtful about our long-term needs." I realized that my father wasn't just talking about financial support. Marcus had been positioning himself as their future caregiver, the son who would look after them in their golden years. I was being systematically replaced in every aspect of my role as their child. Looking at my father sitting in his expensive new chair, surrounded by gifts from my replacement, I understood that this wasn't just about money. Marcus had given Harold something I never could, the feeling of being valuable and respected rather than just supported. While my monthly checks had kept them afloat, Marcus had made Harold feel like a patriarch again, someone whose wisdom and experience mattered. But what hurt most was realizing that my parents were willing to sacrifice their relationship with me and Emma for the comfort and status that Marcus could provide. They weren't just choosing his money over mine, they were choosing him over us. Feeling like an outsider in my own childhood home, I excused myself from Harold's study and wandered toward the kitchen, hoping to find a quiet moment to collect my thoughts. Emma had retreated there as well, sitting alone at the breakfast bar with a plate of untouched appetizers, her legs swinging back and forth in that restless way that meant she was upset but trying to hide it. "Hey, sweetheart, how are you doing?" I asked, sitting down beside her. "Daddy, why don't Grandma and Grandpa want me here?" she asked in a small voice. "The other kids got to come, but you said I couldn't." I didn't know how to answer that question without revealing the painful truth that her grandparents preferred other children to her. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't make sense, honey, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. Emma nodded solemnly, but I could see the confusion and hurt in her eyes. She was too young to understand adult politics, but she was old enough to sense rejection. I was about to suggest we go get some fresh air when I heard voices coming from the pantry area. The kitchen was designed with a large walk-in pantry that connected to a small breakfast nook, and I realized people were having a private conversation just around the corner. I probably should have announced our presence or moved away, but something about the hushed, secretive tone made me freeze and listen. The lawyer said the guardianship papers should be ready after New Year's. Sandra's voice was saying, if anything happens to both of us, Marcus would automatically get custody instead of it going to George by default. My blood turned to ice. Guardianship papers? That's so smart of Marcus to think ahead like that, Patricia replied. George has always been so impractical about planning for the future. Remember how he just assumed he could buy that house without having his finances properly organized? Marcus says it's irresponsible to leave Emma's future to chance. Sandra continued. Has been documenting George's financial instability and emotional issues since the divorce. His lawyer thinks we have a strong case for modifying the custody arrangement, especially with your testimony about his recent behavior. Harold's voice joined the conversation. I hate to say it, but George has seemed increasingly unstable lately. All that stress from trying to support us when he clearly can't afford it. Marcus thinks it's affecting his judgment as a father. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so loud I was afraid they would hear it. They were plotting to take Emma away from me, and my own parents were helping them do it. The custody modification should be straightforward, Sandra said. Marcus' lawyer specializes in family court cases, and he's confident we can demonstrate that Emma needs more stability than George can provide. The financial documentation alone should be enough. What about the inheritance situation? Patricia asked. Have you talked to Marcus about our concerns regarding the will? Oh, that's already handled, Harold replied. Our lawyer is revising everything to reflect our new family structure. Marcus has been so generous and responsible. It only makes sense that everything should go to support his family, rather than to someone who's already proven he can't manage money properly. Inheritance. They were changing their will to leave everything to Marcus instead of me. The house I'd grown up in, the family heirlooms, everything would go to the man who'd destroyed my marriage. I'm just worried about George's reaction when he finds out, Patricia said, her voice concerned but not about me, about the disruption to their plans. He can be so emotional and irrational when he doesn't get his way. Marcus says that's exactly why Emma needs protection from that kind of instability, Sandra replied. Children shouldn't be exposed to that level of emotional volatility. Marcus' kids are so well adjusted because they have consistent, calm leadership. The timing is perfect too, Harold added. Marcus is ready to take over the financial support, so George won't have any leverage to try to control our decisions. Well, finally be free to make the best choices for everyone involved. I realized they weren't just taking Emma away from me. They were making it impossible for me to fight back by removing my financial role in my parents' lives. Without that connection, I'd have no standing to challenge their decisions about family matters. Emma will be so much happier in a stable environment, Sandra concluded. Marcus has already started planning how to integrate her into our family structure. He thinks she needs firmer boundaries and more consistent discipline. She's been so withdrawn and difficult lately, Patricia agreed. Marcus noticed it right away. He has such insight into child psychology. Withdrawn and difficult, Emma was one of the most well-adjusted, happy children I knew. She was curious, creative, and affectionate. The only time she seemed withdrawn was in situations like this, where she sensed adult tension and conflict. The court will see that Marcus can provide everything Emma needs, Sandra continued. Private school, a larger home, siblings, 2 stable parent figures. George just can't compete with that kind of security. I felt Emma tug on my sleeve. She'd been listening too, though I doubted she understood the full implications of what we'd overheard. Her wide eyes were full of questions I couldn't answer without terrifying her. This was the devastating revelation I should have seen coming but had been too blind to recognize. This wasn't just about Christmas party guest lists or family dynamics. Sandra, Marcus, and my own parents had been systematically building a legal case to remove Emma from my life permanently. They'd been documenting my financial struggles, collecting evidence of my emotional stress, and positioning Marcus as the superior father figure. Every month, it'd sent money to support my parents. It'd been funding my own replacement. Every sacrifice Eid made to help them had been twisted into evidence of my inadequacy. Every moment of stress or exhaustion, from working overtime to pay their bills, had been cataloged as proof that I was unfit to raise my daughter. The most crushing part was that my own parents believed this was what was best for Emma. They genuinely thought she'd be better off without me. I couldn't stay hidden in the kitchen any longer, listening to my family plan my destruction. Emma was looking at me with those big, trusting eyes, waiting for me to make sense of what she'd overheard. I took her hand and led her back toward the living room, my mind racing with how to handle what I'd learned. The party was in full swing now. Harold's former business colleagues were clustered around Marcus, who was regaling them with stories about his latest real estate developments. He commanded the room with easy confidence, gesturing with his champagne glass as he described luxury properties and high-end clients. These men, who had known Harold for decades, were hanging on Marcus' every word like he was some kind of guru. I tried to approach the group casually, thinking maybe I could join the conversation and begin to understand how Marcus had won over my father's friends. But as soon as I stepped into their circle, the energy shifted. Marcus smiled at me with what appeared to be warmth but felt distinctly condescending. "George! There you are," Marcus said loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "I was just telling everyone about the new development project I'm launching. Maybe you'd be interested in getting involved somehow." The way he said somehow suggested he was offering me a chance to be useful, rather than including me as an equal. The other men looked at me with polite but distant expressions, clearly seeing me as the odd man out in this gathering. Before I could respond, Marcus suddenly straightened up and reached into his jacket pocket. "Actually, this seems like perfect timing for some exciting news." He pulled out a small velvet box and dropped to one knee, right there in the middle of the living room. The entire party fell silent as Marcus opened the box to reveal an enormous diamond ring. "Sandra," he called out, and everyone turned to see my ex-wife emerging from the kitchen. Her face flushed with what appeared to be surprise, but I now realized was carefully orchestrated drama. "Sandra, will you marry me?" Marcus asked in a voice that carried across the entire room. The guests erupted in applause and cheers as Sandra, tears streaming down her face, said yes. Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger with theatrical flourish, then stood and kissed her deeply while everyone celebrated around them. Harold raised his champagne glass high in the air. "To Marcus and Sandra," Harold announced, his voice strong and proud. "To the son I always wished for and the daughter I'm gaining." He looked directly at me as he said it, his meaning unmistakable. Marcus represents everything we could hope for in a family man. Successful, generous, devoted to children, and committed to taking care of those he loves. The guests toasted enthusiastically while I stood frozen, holding Emma's hand so tightly she winced. Patricia appeared beside Harold, beaming with joy as she hugged Sandra and welcomed her officially to the family. "We couldn't be happier," Patricia announced to the room. "Marcus has already been such a blessing to our family. He's going to give these children the father they deserve." The phrase "these children" hit me like a physical blow. She was talking about Emma, as if she belonged to Marcus now. Marcus, still basking in the congratulations, turned his attention to me with what I can only describe as magnanimous victory. "George, I hope you'll be happy for us. I know this situation might feel complicated, but I want you to know that I plan to be the best possible father to Emma. She's going to have every advantage I can provide." Father to Emma. He was talking about my daughter as if she were already his. "I appreciate your concern," I managed to say, my voice strained with the effort of staying calm. "But Emma already has a father." Marcus' smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Of course, and I would never try to replace you, George. But children benefit from having multiple positive male role models, and I'm in a position to offer Emma opportunities that might otherwise be difficult to provide." He was doing it again, speaking about Emma's needs as if he understood them better than I did, positioning himself as the solution to problems I didn't even know existed. Sandra joined the conversation, still admiring her new ring. "Marcus has been so thoughtful about the transition," she said to the assembled guests. "Hez, already researching the best private schools in the area and looking into programs that would help Emma develop her potential." "What programs?" I asked, though I was beginning to dread the answer. "Well, Marcus thinks Emma might benefit from some social skills coaching," Sandra replied, her voice taking on that concerned tone again. "She's always been so shy and withdrawn. Marcus' children are so confident and outgoing. He thinks Emma could learn from their example." I looked over at Emma, who was standing pressed against my side, overwhelmed by the adult conversations swirling around her. She wasn't shy or withdrawn by nature. She was reacting normally to a confusing and threatening situation. "Emma doesn't need social skills coaching," I said firmly. "She's perfectly well-adjusted." Marcus chuckled in a way that suggested he found my perspective charmingly naive. "George, I understand it's difficult to be objective about our own children's development. That's exactly why kids benefit from having multiple perspectives on their growth and needs." Harold's friend Robert, a man I'd known since childhood, spoke up from the group. "Marcus was just telling us about his approach to child development. Very impressive, very structured. Kids today need that kind of guidance." "Absolutely," agreed another colleague. "Children need consistent boundaries and high expectations. Marcus has clearly done an excellent job with his own kids." I realized that Marcus hadn't just been winning over my parents, had been positioning himself as an expert on child rearing to their entire social circle. When the custody battle began, these people would all testify to Marcus' superior parenting philosophy and my apparent shortcomings. "Marcus has offered to let you visit Emma regularly," Sandra said, addressing me but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Has very committed to maintaining healthy relationships with extended family. Visit Emma," as if I were a distant relative rather than her father. "I think there might be some misunderstanding here," I said, my voice getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. "Emma lives with me. I'm her primary custodial parent. For now," Marcus replied smoothly. "But Sandra and I think it might be time to reevaluate what's truly best for Emma's long-term development and stability." The room had gone quiet again, sensing the tension building between us. Emma pressed closer to my side, and I could feel her trembling slightly. "George has been struggling financially," Patricia announced to the room, her voice carrying a tone of sympathetic concern that felt like betrayal. "Has been trying to support us beyond his means, and it's been affecting his emotional stability." I stared at my mother in shock. She was publicly airing what she saw as my personal failures to justify replacing me with Marcus. "We've been worried about him," Harold added, playing his part in the performance. "The stress of trying to be everything to everyone has been overwhelming for him. Marcus thinks George would benefit from stepping back and focusing on getting his own life in order." Sandra nodded sympathetically. "George has always had trouble accepting help, but Marcus has shown us what real stability and leadership look like." I realized this wasn't just an engagement announcement. It was a public declaration that Marcus was taking over my role in the family. They were using the party, with all of Harold's former colleagues as witnesses, to establish Marcus' position as Emma's new father figure and my parents' new son. Marcus raised his champagne glass one more time, to new beginnings and giving children the stable, loving homes they deserve. As the guests toasted, I understood that this was Marcus' masterstroke. In front of witnesses, Head positioned himself as the generous benefactor, offering to care for Emma while portraying me as the unstable biological father who couldn't provide what she needed. When this went to court, every person in this room would testify that they'd seen Marcus step up to be the father Emma deserved, while I stood by looking bitter and resistant to change. Emma started to cry, overwhelmed by the tension and adult hostility she couldn't understand. When I knelt down to comfort her, Marcus was immediately there too, offering her a tissue and speaking in a gentle voice that made him appear caring while making me look helpless. This was the public humiliation I hadn't seen coming. Marcus hadn't just stolen my wife and manipulated my parents. Head orchestrated a perfect public relations campaign to establish himself as Emma's rightful father, while casting me as the obstacle to her happiness. The humiliation of that public engagement announcement was more than I could bear. I needed to get away from the crowd, from Marcus' triumphant smile, from the pitying looks of people who'd known me since childhood. I scooped Emma up in my arms and told her we needed to go somewhere quiet for a minute. "Daddy, I want to go home," she whispered in my ear as I carried her upstairs to my old bedroom. "I know, sweetheart. Well, leave soon," I promised, though I wasn't sure how to extract us from this nightmare without making things worse. I set Emma down in my childhood room, which Patricia had converted into a guest room years ago but still contained some of my old furniture. Emma curled up in the reading chair by the window while I tried to process everything that had happened. My hands were shaking with anger and something that felt close to panic. I needed to think clearly, to figure out how to respond to what I'd learned. But my mind kept racing between fury and despair. That's when I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers on the small desk Harold used for paying bills when he wanted privacy from the party noise downstairs. As I bent to pick up the scattered documents, I realized I was looking at something that didn't make sense. Bank statements with my name on them, but showing accounts I'd never opened. Employment records that claimed I'd been written up multiple times at work for tardiness and poor performance, which was completely false. Most shocking of all, there was a psychological evaluation report with my name on it, concluding that I showed signs of emotional instability and questionable judgment in parental situations. I sat down hard in the desk chair, examining each document more carefully. The bank statements showed a pattern of irresponsible spending and overdraft fees that would certainly look bad to a family court judge. The employment records detailed performance issues and disciplinary actions that could suggest I was unreliable and unable to hold steady work. The psychological evaluation, supposedly conducted by Dr. Richard Thornfield, recommended that I seek anger management counseling and questioned my fitness for single parenthood. But none of it was real. I'd never been to Dr. Thornfield's office. I'd never been written up at work. The bank account numbers didn't match any accounts I'd ever held. These were sophisticated forgeries, professional quality documents designed to destroy my credibility in a custody battle. I took photos of every page with my phone, my anger transforming into something much more focused and determined. Marcus hadn't just been playing psychological games with my family. He'd been building a fraudulent case against me using fake documentation. Looking more carefully through Harold's desk, I found correspondence between Marcus and a private investigator named James Morrison. The letters detailed a plan to build a compelling case against my parental fitness by documenting my financial struggles and emotional instability. But the documentation was largely fabricated. One letter from Morrison to Marcus was particularly revealing. The subject's actual behavior doesn't provide sufficient grounds for custody modification. However, the financial stress angle combined with the fabricated employment issues should create enough concern for the court to consider alternative arrangements. The psychological evaluation adds professional credibility to claims of emotional instability. I photographed everything, understanding now that Marcus' manipulation went far beyond charm and gifts. Head hired professionals to create false evidence against me. This wasn't just a custody dispute. It was fraud. Emma appeared beside the desk chair, having gotten bored with looking out the window. "Daddy, what are all those papers?" I looked down at my daughter, her face trusting and innocent despite everything she'd witnessed tonight. In that moment, holding documented proof that someone was trying to steal her away from me using lies and forgeries, I felt something shift inside me. The panic and despair transformed into cold, focused determination. "Emma, do you remember when we talked about how sometimes people don't tell the truth?" She nodded solemnly. "You said lying is wrong because it hurts people." "That's right. And sometimes, when people lie about important things, other people have to work very hard to show everyone what the truth really is." I realized that I'd been approaching this situation all wrong. I'd been trying to defend myself against Marcus' superior resources and my parents' preference for his stability. But I'd been playing defense when I should have been investigating the offense. Marcus had made a crucial mistake by leaving evidence of his fraud in Harold's house, probably assuming I'd never have reason to search through my father's private papers. "Are we going to tell everyone the truth?" Emma asked, her voice small but determined. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to tell everyone the truth." I uploaded all the photos to my cloud storage account, making sure there were multiple backups. Then I sent copies to my own email address and saved them to a secure folder. Whatever happened next, Marcus wouldn't be able to destroy the evidence of his fraud. Looking at Emma, I realized that this wasn't just about protecting my relationship with her. It was about protecting her from people who were willing to build their family on lies and manipulation. If Marcus could fabricate evidence against me, what else was he capable of? What kind of environment would Emma grow up in if these people succeeded in their plan? I thought about Sandra downstairs, showing off her engagement ring and accepting congratulations for choosing a better father for Emma. Did she know about the forged documents? Was she complicit in the fraud? Or was she another victim of Marcus' manipulation? For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had some control over the situation. Marcus had made the classic mistake of overconfident criminals. Head left evidence behind because he never imagined anyone would discover it. Emma crawled into my lap, wrapping her small arms around my neck. "Daddy, I don't like it here anymore. Can we go home now?" "Not yet, honey, but soon. First, Daddy needs to do something very important to make sure we can always be together." I realized that running away from the party would make me look guilty and unstable, exactly what Marcus wanted. Instead, I needed to stay and expose the truth in a way that would destroy his credibility permanently. I had documentary evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and manipulation. I just needed to present it in a way that would shock my parents and the party guests into understanding what Marcus really was. The spark of resolve that had been building since I found the forged documents suddenly flared into a full plan. Marcus had used public manipulation and false documentation to try to destroy me. I would use the truth and his own evidence to destroy him instead. But I needed to be smart about it. One wrong move, and Marcus could claim I was having an emotional breakdown, which would actually support his custody case. I needed to stay calm, present the evidence clearly, and let Marcus' own actions condemn him. Emma looked up at me with those trusting eyes. "Are you going to fix this, Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart. Daddy is going to fix this." I helped Emma wash her face in the upstairs bathroom and straightened her dress, preparing us both for what I knew would be a decisive confrontation. My phone was fully charged. The photos were safely stored in multiple locations, and I had a plan that would expose Marcus' fraud in front of everyone who mattered. When we returned to the living room, the celebration was still in full swing. Marcus was holding court near the fireplace, showing off Sandra's ring to Harold's business associates, while regaling them with stories about his various real estate successes. Sandra was glowing with happiness, surrounded by Patricia and several other women who were admiring her engagement ring and listening to wedding plans. I approached Marcus' group with what I hoped looked like genuine interest rather than the cold fury I was actually feeling. "Marcus, congratulations again on your engagement," I said, extending my hand for a handshake. "I was thinking about what you said earlier, about getting involved in your business somehow. I'd love to hear more about your development projects." Marcus beamed, clearly pleased that I seemed to be accepting his dominance gracefully. "George, I'm so glad you're interested. I've been hoping we could find ways to work together for the family's benefit." He launched into a detailed description of his latest luxury condo development, describing the high-end finishes, the exclusive location, and the wealthy clientele he served. As he talked, I started asking specific questions about his education, his business licenses, and his development experience. "Where did you study real estate development?" I asked innocently. "University of Southern California," Marcus replied smoothly. "Graduated summa cum laude from their business school?" I nodded appreciatively. "That's impressive. What year was that?" 2006, Marcus said without hesitation. "And you went straight into development after graduation?" "Well, I started with a smaller firm first, learned the business from the ground up before launching my own company." I continued asking questions, noting how Marcus provided detailed answers without seeming suspicious of my interest. Harold and his friends were clearly impressed by Marcus' credentials and experience. But I was building towards something much more important than small talk. "Marcus, I have to admit something," I said, pulling out my phone. "I've been doing some research to better understand Emma's potential stepfather. I hope you don't mind, but as her father, I want to make sure she's in good hands." Marcus' expression flickered slightly, but he maintained his confident smile. "Of course, George. I'd expect nothing less from a concerned parent." "I found some really interesting information," I continued, opening my phone's photo gallery. "In fact, I think everyone here would find it fascinating." I connected my phone to Harold's large smart TV, something Marcus had probably been using earlier to show off his business presentations. The screen displayed my phone's interface, and I opened the first photo of the forged bank statements. "This is interesting," I said conversationally. "These are bank statements with my name on them, supposedly showing my financial irresponsibility. The only problem is, I've never had accounts at this bank." The room began to quiet as people realized something serious was happening. Marcus' smile became strained, but he tried to maintain his composure. "George, I'm not sure what you're trying to suggest," Marcus said carefully. "Oh, I'm not suggesting anything yet," I replied, swiping to the next photo. "This is an employment record claiming I've been written up multiple times at work. But here is my actual employment record from my HR department, which I requested yesterday." I displayed a genuine letter from my company's HR department confirming my excellent employment history and recent performance review scores. The contrast between the two documents was stark and obvious. "And this," I continued, swiping to the psychological evaluation, "is supposedly a professional assessment of my mental health and parenting fitness. But Dr. Richard Thornfield doesn't exist. I checked with the state medical board. This is a completely fabricated document." The room was now completely silent, except for the sound of Sandra's sharp intake of breath. Marcus had gone very pale, but he was still trying to maintain control. "George, I don't know what you're implying," Marcus said, his voice tighter now, "but this seems like some kind of emotional breakdown. Maybe you should sit down and we can discuss this privately." "Oh, we're just getting to the good part," I said, displaying the correspondence between Marcus and the private investigator. "These are letters between Marcus and James Morrison, a private investigator, discussing how to build a fraudulent case against my parental fitness because my actual behavior doesn't provide sufficient grounds for custody modification." I read directly from Morrison's letter. "The subject's actual behavior doesn't provide sufficient grounds for custody modification. However, the financial stress angle, combined with the fabricated employment issues, should create enough concern for the court to consider alternative arrangements." Harold sank into his chair, staring at the television screen in shock. Patricia's face had gone white as she realized what she was seeing. "Marcus," Sandra said, her voice barely a whisper, "what is this?" But I wasn't finished. I swiped to photos of receipts and invoices that had been mixed in with the correspondence. And here's the really interesting part. Marcus paid James Morrison $18,000 to create fake documentation and conduct surveillance on me. But that's not all he paid for. I displayed receipts for Harold's medical treatments, the ones Marcus had supposedly paid for out of generosity. These medical bills were actually paid with my money. Marcus had Morrison set up a complex scheme to redirect my monthly support payments through shell accounts, then present the payments to you as his own generosity. Harold stood up suddenly, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "That's impossible. Marcus paid those bills directly." "No, Dad. Marcus created fake accounts that made it look like he was paying your bills while actually using my money. Every dollar you thought was Marcus' generosity was actually my support that had been stolen and redirected." I showed the banking records that traced the money trail, documentation that Morrison had apparently kept as insurance against Marcus. The evidence showed a sophisticated scheme to steal my support payments and present them as Marcus' contributions to the family. Sandra was staring at Marcus with growing horror. "You told me George wasn't supporting his parents anymore. You said had abandoned his responsibilities." "Sandra, this is all a misunderstanding," Marcus said desperately. "George is obviously having some kind of mental health crisis. These documents could be fabricated by anyone." "Actually," I said, pulling up my phone's recording app, "I've been recording our conversation for the last 10 minutes. Including your admission that you graduated from USC in 2006, which we can easily verify. I'm betting we'll find some interesting discrepancies when we check your actual background." The recording had captured not just Marcus' biographical claims, but also his attempts to discredit me as mentally unstable when confronted with evidence of his fraud. Harold's friend, Robert, who was a retired attorney, stepped forward and examined the documents on the television screen. "These are serious allegations of fraud and identity theft," he said gravely. "If these documents are authentic, this represents multiple felony charges. Marcus made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. Everyone needs to calm down. George is obviously having a breakdown and has fabricated these documents to try to frame me. This is exactly the kind of emotional instability Sandra and I have been concerned about. But Sandra was backing away from Marcus, her engagement ring suddenly looking like a shackle instead of a symbol of love. "The medical bills," she said slowly. "You told me you paid for Harold's heart treatment. You said George had stopped contributing to his parents' care." "Sandra, you have to listen to me," Marcus pleaded, his smooth confidence finally cracking. "George is manipulating the situation. Has trying to destroy our happiness because he can't accept that you've moved on." I displayed one final photo. A bank statement showing that Marcus' business account had been overdrawn multiple times and that had received notices for unpaid debts. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet the successful real estate developer who's actually facing bankruptcy and has been using my family as a financial rescue plan." The room erupted as everyone began talking at once. Harold was demanding explanations, Sandra was crying, and Patricia looked like she might faint. Marcus tried to leave, but Robert blocked his path. "Young man, you're not going anywhere until the police arrive," Robert said firmly. "What we've witnessed here tonight constitutes evidence of multiple serious crimes." Marcus' facade finally collapsed completely. Gone was the confident family man, replaced by someone who looked desperate and cornered. "You don't understand," he said wildly. "I needed this to work. I have debts, obligations. Sandra and the kids, they need security." Sandra stared at him in horror. "What debts? You told me your business was thriving." "The business is fine," Marcus lied frantically. "This is all a temporary setback. George is sabotaging everything because he's jealous." But the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I had documented proof of fraud, theft, and conspiracy. More importantly, I had revealed the truth in front of witnesses who could confirm Marcus' admissions and reactions. Emma, who had been staying close to my side throughout the confrontation, tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy, did we tell the truth?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, picking her up. "We told the truth. The strategic counterattack had worked perfectly. Marcus had been exposed not just as a manipulator, but as a criminal who had built his relationship with my family on stolen money and fabricated evidence. The man who had positioned himself as the superior father figure and provider had been revealed as a fraud who was actually facing financial ruin. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of police reports, witness statements, and phone calls to lawyers. Robert had immediately called 911, and responding officers took detailed statements from everyone present. Marcus was arrested on charges of fraud, identity theft, and money laundering, after I provided them with all the documented evidence I'd discovered. Sandra sat in Patricia's kitchen, her engagement ring now sitting on the counter like evidence at a crime scene, crying as she realized how completely she'd been manipulated. The children she'd brought to the party were confused and frightened, not understanding why their mother was upset or why Marcus had been taken away in handcuffs. "I can't believe I fell for this," Sandra said through her tears as I sat across from her. Emma finally asleep in my arms after the exhausting evening. "He seemed so stable, so secure. Everything he told me about his business, his finances, his feelings for me and the kids, all lies." Harold and Patricia looked like they'd aged 10 years in one evening. The revelation that Marcus had been stealing my support money and presenting it as his own generosity had shattered their understanding of everything that had happened over the past few months. "George, I don't know how to apologize," Harold said, his voice broken with shame. "We believed everything Marcus told us about you, about your finances, about your emotional state. We let him turn us against our own son and granddaughter. The inheritance changes," Patricia added quietly. "We already signed papers, leaving everything to Marcus' family. Our lawyer said it was the responsible thing to do since Marcus was taking care of us and you were struggling. I learned that Marcus' manipulation had been even more extensive than I'd realized. Had convinced my parents that I was hiding financial problems, that I resented supporting them, and that I was planning to put them in a nursing home as soon as I could. Every generous thing I'd done had been twisted into evidence of secret resentment or inadequacy. The forensic accountant I hired over the following weeks traced the money trail completely. Marcus had indeed been redirecting my monthly support payments through a complex series of shell accounts, then presenting them to my parents as his own contributions. had also been forging documents to support his custody case and had hired the private investigator to create a false narrative about my fitness as a parent. But perhaps most shocking was the discovery that Marcus wasn't just manipulating my family. The police investigation revealed that Head used similar tactics with 2 previous girlfriends, both divorced mothers with family money or inheritance prospects. He had a pattern of targeting women going through difficult transitions, then systematically isolating them from their support systems while positioning himself as the solution to all their problems. Sandra's divorce from Marcus was swift once she understood the extent of his deception. She voluntarily entered counseling to understand how she'd been manipulated and to develop better boundaries for future relationships. More importantly, she apologized sincerely to Emma and me, admitting that she'd allowed her desire for security and stability to cloud her judgment about what was truly best for our daughter. The custody arrangement didn't need to be modified after all. Sandra and I developed the healthy co-parenting relationship we should have had from the beginning, based on honest communication and Emma's actual needs, rather than Marcus' manipulative interference. My relationship with Harold and Patricia required much more time and work to repair. They had to confront not just their poor judgment about Marcus, but their willingness to believe the worst about their own son, based on lies and fabricated evidence. We started family counseling together, working through the deep hurt and betrayal that had poisoned our relationship. 6 months later, Harold and Patricia had learned to live within their means, budgeting carefully with the support I continued to provide but at a more sustainable level. They'd sold some unnecessary possessions and downsized their lifestyle, but they'd also gained something more valuable: genuine respect for the sacrifices they'd been making and pride in their son's character and work ethic. We were so afraid of being a burden, Patricia explained during one of our counseling sessions. Marcus made us feel valuable and respected instead of just supported. But we realize now that your support was never about burden. It was about love. Harold nodded, tears in his eyes. Marcus made me feel important and wise, but you made us feel loved and secure, even when we were too foolish to appreciate it. Emma thrived in the aftermath of Marcus' departure from our lives. Without the constant tension and manipulation, she returned to being the confident, happy child she'd always been. She never asked why Marcus had disappeared, seeming to instinctively understand that some changes were for the better. The house renovation plans were abandoned, but Harold and Patricia did make some improvements with money they saved by managing their expenses more carefully. More importantly, Emma now had a proper playroom in their guest room and felt genuinely welcomed when we visited every Sunday for family dinner. I learned that the most important lesson from this experience wasn't about recognizing manipulation or protecting myself from fraud, though those skills proved crucial. The deepest lesson was about the difference between providing for someone and truly supporting them. For years, I'd thought that sending money to my parents was enough to show my love and fulfill my responsibilities as their son. But Marcus had shown them something I'd failed to provide: respect for their wisdom and experience, appreciation for their contributions to the family, and a sense that they were valued for more than just their need for help. True support isn't just about meeting someone's financial needs. It's about helping them maintain their dignity and sense of purpose while providing assistance. I'd been so focused on keeping my parents afloat financially that I'd failed to keep them afloat emotionally. Emma and I still live in our modest apartment, but it feels like a palace now because it's built on truth and genuine love instead of manipulation and lies. We have our Friday movie nights and weekend pancake breakfasts. We do homework together at our little kitchen table and read bedtime stories in her room decorated with her own artwork. But most importantly, Emma is growing up understanding that real love doesn't require perfection or endless sacrifice. It requires honesty, respect, and the courage to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. She learned that families can make mistakes and hurt each other, but they can also heal and grow stronger if everyone is willing to acknowledge their errors and work toward forgiveness. The Christmas party that had seemed like such a disaster became the beginning of our family's healing. We learned that true security doesn't come from money or status, but from relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. We discovered that love isn't about competing for affection or proving worthiness through grand gestures, but about showing up consistently with integrity and care. Sandra eventually found a genuinely stable relationship with a man who valued her and her children for who they truly were, not for what they could provide him. Emma gained a stepfather who respects her relationship with me and enhances her life instead of trying to replace what she already had. As for Marcus, he was convicted on multiple fraud charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. But more than the legal consequences, he lost everything he'd been trying to gain through his manipulation: family, respect, security, and love. His children, who had been used as props in his schemes, were ultimately better off without his toxic influence in their lives. Standing in my parents' house exactly 1 year after that devastating Christmas party, watching Emma play peacefully with her new train set while Harold and Patricia prepared dinner together, I understood that the greatest victory wasn't exposing Marcus' crimes or protecting my custody of Emma, though both were important. The greatest victory was learning that families can survive betrayal and manipulation if they're willing to face the truth together and rebuild their relationships on stronger foundations. Wed all learned painful lessons about the difference between appearance and reality, about the importance of trust and verification, and about the courage required to stand up for what's right, even when everyone around you believes something different. Emma looked up from her toys and smiled at me, secure in the knowledge that her father would always fight for her, and that her family, despite their imperfections, would always choose truth over convenience and love over appearances. That's the most important lesson any of us can learn. That real love isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about having the courage to face difficult truths, to admit our mistakes, and to keep choosing what's right, even when it's hard. It's about building our lives on foundations of honesty rather than trying to maintain facades that will ultimately crumble. The greatest gift we can give our children isn't financial security or social status. It's the example of adults who stand up for what's right, who choose truth over convenience, and who love them enough to fight for their well-being, even when it means making difficult sacrifices. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone tried to manipulate you by turning your family against you? How did you handle it? And what did you learn about the importance of truth in relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and manipulation. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that it's always worth fighting for the truth, even when it seems like everyone is against you. Thank you for listening. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's lies, even when they're people you care about deeply.